Merriam-Webster defines a meme as 1. An amusing or interesting item, such as a captioned picture or video or genre of items that is spread widely online, especially through social media. There is a meme of Gritty. If you don't know who Gritty is, you're probably not from the Philadelphia area. But Gritty is a mascot for the Philadelphia Flyers. In the meme, Gritty is posing with his thumbs up next to a leg tattoo of his face. Over Gritty are the words, Type 3 having the lovely ability to make people feel seen and connected within every interaction. And over the leg tattoo of his face are the words, Type 3 being totally disoriented internally as a result of their pattern of shuffling through the various versions of themselves until the person in front of them is charmed and they get a hit of the delicious external validation. And well, to put it in the internet's way of saying something that resonates with them, it me. Welcome to the Behaviorists with Work Wisdom, where we help you adopt high-performance mindsets, behaviors, communication, and culture. I'm your host, Janine James. Our intention for the Behaviors podcast is to share accessible, concrete practices that you can weave into your whole life to begin a shift toward joy and meaningful achievement. Today, we're turning our focus on the Enneagram. We're grateful to have Liz Orr with me, the creative talent behind the Instagram account Rude Ass Enneagram. Liz Orr calls herself the Gordon Ramsay of the Enneagram world and the meanie behind at Rude Ass Enneagram. Today on the show, we want to explore the individual centers and stances of each number, the memeable quality of each number's pitfalls, and how humor and self-knowledge can make us achieve better in the workplace. Liz, thank you for talking with me today.
Janine, it's so great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
I'm so excited because, one, I love social media, and I am, we have our art director here is younger than me, and so we kind of vacillate between me talking about things from the 90s that she has just no concept of. And then on the other hand, she's like this old soul who is very cool and listens to 80s, music and things like that. And sometimes she'll have to translate to the rest of the crew what I'm saying, because I'm like, there's this thing on TikTok, and and I'll get very enthusiastic. So she's at once, straddling the generations here. But I love social media, so I really love the quality of memes. And your memes are hilarious. When I saw Gritty, I said, this is perfect. And as a type 3, this resonates with me. Me.
I'm glad.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you discovered the Enneagram and how you came up with the idea for Rude Ass Enneagram.
Yeah, well, it's all a convergence of everything, right? So I kind of like to joke that my Bruce Wayne identity, what I do during the day, although I am not a billionaire, it should be noted.
The memes are not raking in the billions yet.
Not yet. But I work in higher education as an associate university chaplain. So I work in religious and spiritual life at a college down in North Carolina. And I was introduced to the Enneagram, I think I can safely, yes, it's been 10 years. It's been more than 10 years. Yeah, right out of college myself. I was living and working with the same people right out of undergraduate. And living with people is difficult. Working with people is difficult. Living and working with the same people is a recipe for homicide. So, so the director of that nonprofit she had that wisdom. She knew that, and she arranged for someone to come in and teach all of the community members about the Enneagram. And it was, I remember the conversation, it was just in our living room. I think there were 6 or 7 of us, and I initially mistyped myself, which is totally okay.
Me too.
Yes, but it just still resonated so hard. It really like hit me in the gut. And so anyway, so that I learned about it when I was about 22, 23. And then when I was 25, 26, I got the job that I'm at now. And I remembered, I remember when I was introduced to this tool, the Enneagram, and wouldn't that be cool to introduce that to my students and see where it lands with them. And so during one of our meetings, I just started like rattling off reading from David Daniels' book, The Essential Enneagram. And it was actually in that conversation that as I was reading the paragraph about my type, all of my students kind of, as I was reading that paragraph, they were like, yeah, that sounds familiar. So it was this invitation to acquaint myself with this other type that I hadn't really considered. And it was a much better fit. It had better language and I had more self-awareness.
If you don't
at that
mind
point,
me asking, because I do want to hear about the idea behind Root as Enneagram, but I also mistyped. So I would love to know what you mistyped as and what your Enneagram number is now.
Yes. So as a young white woman in an unhealthy relationship, and who was all about like serving others and avoiding, my feelings, I totally thought it was a 2.
Wow. Yeah.
Yes. And then it was the game changer for me was really understanding the 8's relationship to vulnerability, which can look like the 2 not wanting to acknowledge their needs, etc. But really the anger, I was like, oops, yep. And as an 8, I really do build intimacy through conflict. It's like getting in little scuff ups is kind of fun.
Oh my. Yeah. That's a very 8 statement to make. And I think my reaction to your 8 statement, I mistyped as a 9, right? And because I don't love conflict, my reaction to you saying that, sometimes getting into little stuff's can be fun. I thought that first reaction was a very 9, reaction. But then I realized, when I was thinking about the 9, that I'm not afraid of bringing conflict if it's necessary. I would definitely want to avoid it, but I can become very unpeaceful very quickly.
Sure.
And that was like my revelation about like, okay, well, I'm not a 9. And I realized that as a 3, that it just so happens that shuffling and shifting, which is what was so good about that gritty meme, is really more indicative of my personality. And we're going to talk about the centers and stances in a bit, but I just wanted to kind of know, and I think with people who like mistype, and we're going to go into like how you can find that answer, but I wanted to know what that was for you. So how did it translate into your, talking with your students, and then you have this Instagram account?
Yeah. So the Instagram account came several years later, but the more that I started talking about the Enneagram after that initial conversation, excuse me, the more I realized what a valuable framework it was. And really the point where it became this sort of point of saturation, I had a graduate student intern 1 year, and she was a graduate student out of the divinity school at the university that I work at. And there was a class there, there's a faculty member there, wonderful faculty member there, who taught a class on the Enneagram. And at the same time that she was an intern for me, she was in this class. So we'd meet weekly for one-on-one meetings, and we'd end up talking about the Enneagram. It just kept coming back around. And probably in the same year, the office that I work in, we had a workshop on the Enneagrams. That same faculty member came in and taught us about the Enneagram, gave us sort of a 3-hour introductory. And so got a little bit deeper with it. And then I started, I think that summer, maybe the book, The Road Back to You by Ian Cron and Susan Stabile came out, and I read that. And, that's a great book. It's very anecdotal and illustrative of our type. And so I read that book, and all these conversations have been floating. And I was also subscribed to the Enneagram Institute's Ennea Thought of the Day, which are these daily emails you get. And it's just a little teaching, a little sort of snippet of, hey, why don't you try this based on your type? And I was having this conversation with a dear friend of mine, Adjoa, and she was like, those emails are rude. Like, it was her comment about that. I was like, they are. They're like, you're an 8. Why don't you try something different than your normal personality pattern? Like, why don't you try not steamrolling everyone into what your way? And it's okay, like, fine. So that kind of, again, that's all cooking up in my brain.
Yeah.
And at the time that I started Redact Enneagram, which was back in 2018, not that long ago, but feels like a world ago.
Almost 5 years. So
right. The only like Instagram gig in town on the Enneagram front was a very Christian account, which there's nothing wrong with that, and that's really helpful for the people who respond to that kind of language and that kind of framing of the Enneagram. And there are people who are all kinds of different religions other than Christian and are no religion or have been harmed by religion. And so I wanted to create another doorway in, another access point. And I thought humor was a little more universal and a little more, it could create somewhat of a wider doorway for people to come in and then find the language that suits them or works for them.
That's really great. As someone who is coming from a spiritual background, that is very sensitive of you to acknowledge that. I think that that experience and self-knowledge is beneficial for everyone, regardless of their political or religious leanings. And making that accessible to people through humor, I really do love that that approach to it. So what I like about the Enneagram is that you feel understood and seen. But something that I found, my experience with realizing I was a 3 was because there was a podcast. I don't know if you listen to Glennon Doyle's podcast, We Can Do Hard Things.
Yeah. I actually don't listen to it, but I saw when she did do an episode on the Enneagram.
And one of the things that was interesting is, someone was listening, they were talking about a 3, and they were saying, everything is a way to achieve something. Like, I'm always rating my level of achievement. And I was like, but everybody does that. And, like, I'm either winning or I'm failing. And I was like, well, everyone does that though. Like, that's what everybody does. And when everybody reacted like, no, they don't, that's what kind of brought me to understanding a little bit more about my number, that this is like the internal motivation. I do think what is sometimes difficult in the Enneagram, and this is where it would be helpful to go through the stances, is that it kind of becomes like a face or a caricature that it's hard for people to attach to, because I'll say, this is my redemption tour for the 3. The 3, especially in even the road back to you, I felt like when they were describing it, it was kind of like they're the snake oil salesman of the Enneagram. It's like, here you go. See, this is the,
build that way.
This is going to make your, everything's going to work out. And they just kind of like selling something, or, they're totally, there's no genuine, feelings or thoughts for that person, that they're the kind of fake Hollywood, uber successful one. And as a, poor, working in retail for, $12 an hour person, that didn't really resonate with me. And so I was like, well, I'm definitely not a 3, because I, am not a snake oil salesman. And so,
Sure.
and so, it was, or I'm not fake, if you will.
Right.
Now, there's
Right.
definitely levels that we can talk about where I have gotten there. The reason I'm sharing this is because I do think I think maybe one of the most common reasons why people might mistype is because what they're reading about in their
Hmm.
Enneagram type, that kind of caricature, always the
Right.
same person representing the number,
Right. Right.
doesn't kind of resonate with them. Do you find that to be the case with you as well?
Yeah, I think a couple of things happen that can kind of cause us to go off track.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, I think we can focus on the behavior
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
so than the underlying motivation. And I'm guilty of it in my memes, and that like sometimes I
Mm-hmm.
will talk about the behavior, the common patterns of behavior, rather than the motivation. But what it really does come down to is how are we trying to protect ourselves in the world that we are perceiving?
Mm-hmm.
And there are these 9 different ways of seeing the world, and they're all true.
Yeah.
They're all, like, yes, they are not the full representation of how good and bad the world can be, but they are this little snippet of what is true.
Yeah.
And that is what we are reacting out of. That is the thing that creates our patterns. That's what we're trying to protect ourselves against.
Yes.
And so that's where I think people sometimes get off kilter in terms of finding their type. I also think, and I struggle with this. So like I'll be the first to admit it's one of the hardest things to resist doing. But a lot of people will type other people. They'll just
Oh,
like when
yeah.
they're introducing their friend, they're like, "Oh, you are such a 4," or "You are such whatever," right?
Yeah.
And we can't know someone else's inner landscape. We can't actually know their motivation. Maybe
That
they
is
share it with us,
so
but
true.
right, which is why it's so important not to type someone not to tell someone what you think their type is. Again,
Yes.
it's hard not to put them into that framework sort of on an internal level, but
Yeah.
if you can allow them to have their own journey with figuring out their type, that is so much more helpful than telling them you are this.
It's
And
yeah. It's really interesting because I found, especially with myself and others, that, people who are closest to you can definitely feel
yeah.
like they could tell you what your type was, right?
Oh,
They
yeah,
could be
they'll tell
like,
you all about
oh,
you.
you
Yeah.
are just steamrolling through the entire thing, and they can just
Yep.
kind of go through and tell you what you are. But what's really, really interesting is that that statement you just made, that is, just want to put some highlight on that for the listeners about, you can't know someone else's inner landscape. The
Yeah.
reasons and the ways that people are behaving. My mom read, The Road Back to You and was like, "You're such a sweetheart. So you're the sweetheart of the Enneagram. You're a 9." But she
Right.
didn't realize that, like, I'm sweet at home, with her, actually. Not even with my dad, right? Like, I'm just, I'm just
Right.
sweet to her.
Right.
She just, that was just
Right.
her engagement with me. And so that's what she
Yep.
thought, versus like, with the rest of the world, in the working world, or with my friends, or with this person, I would, have different ways of interacting and engaging with them, and different hats, as I would call them, or different ways of interacting, which is very 3 to say.
I wasn't gonna say it, but I was thinking it.
Short of being unhealthy, I definitely have completely different Janines that reside in different spaces
Sure.
and have an existential crisis when they all come together. So,
Yep.
but
Yep.
one person who's interacting with me every day at work or whatever might be like, "Oh, I totally know what your type is," but because they don't know why, my motivations for why
Yeah.
I'm acting the way I am, and ultimately
Right.
realizing that I don't avoid conflict because I am afraid of conflict. I avoid conflict because I see it as a failure in relationships. If you're always fighting,
Mm-hmm.
and I like to
Right.
win at
Right.
relationships, when it being a good daughter, when it being a good whatever, you
Right.
know,
Yes.
that was my revelation. So could we talk a little bit about those centers and stances of the different numbers for those who haven't, engaged with the Enneagram before?
Sure. And this can be a really helpful way. Also, another sort of lens and layer of the Enneagram to look through in order to land on your type if you're not quite sure, or certainly to narrow down some options. So the centers are typically referred to as the centers of intelligence. Sometimes they're referred to as the triads. But what they refer to is, the Enneagram is a system of 9, and you can break it down into 3s in about 1 million ways. And the centers of intelligence were actually the starting point of what we today understand the Enneagram as. It was not presented as 9 different types. That development and research kind of came later, but it was initially developed as these 3 centers. And we have all 3. We have a gut center of intelligence, a really like somatic knowing, and that is represented by types 8, 9, and 1. We have a emotional center of intelligence, a really affective way of attuning to others, and that is represented by types 2, 3, and 4. And then we have a mental intelligence, a head-centered intelligence, it provides clarity, it provides a precision in how we observe and take in the world and synthesize what we're observing in our brains. And so again, we have all 3 of these. We tend to lean on one of them, and your type is, what your type is will determine where you fall in those centers and which of those centers you rely upon. So folks in the gut center, 8, 9s, and 1s, they have an incredible like body-based strength and body-based instinctive knowing. We just like right here, right now, we kind of get these gut punches. I often refer to that, and we just know what we know, and maybe can't explain it quite as well as we'd like to, can't put it quite to words, but we just have these very strong senses of knowing in our bodies. We also have a very particular relationship with anger. All 3 types express it very differently. It's a very outward in their expression of anger. 9s are very numb and they fall asleep to it. And 1s really wrestle with it and try to control the expression of their anger. It's not that 1s aren't angry, but it can be a destructive force. It can be out of control, and 1s really try to control their anger. And I think that the source of that anger for the 8, 9, and 1 is this pattern of self-forgetting that happens in the body center, this forgetting of boundaries and limitations, forgetting of themselves and their importance, and forgetting of their humanity and their right and their entitlement to being messy and flawed and in progress. So I think, and also like crossing of their boundaries, right? That's a very body-based experience. Anger is the output of when their boundaries get crossed. Yeah. So that's your gut center. And then you've got your heart center, your 2, 3s, and 4s. And these are folks who are attuned to the outside world. They're very attuned to the needs of others. They're very attuned to what brings value into the world. They're very attuned to beauty and depth and mystery and meaning. And they have a little bit of a nostalgic, sometimes bordering on melancholic longing for the past. And they all share a particular relationship with shame. With like, am I worthy of love? Am I worthy of receiving love, of being loved, of being seen? And I think the source of that is in this shape shifting that they feel they have to do in order to earn love.
Me
and all 3
me journaling everything that you're saying right now.
Well, it's funny, the 3s get like saddled with the reputation for being the chameleon the most, right? They get sort of they get stuck with this reputation of, well, you're the insincere one. But really, all three types in the Heart Center perform. They perform for love.
You hear that,
and so,
2s and 4s?
Yeah.
I'm not alone out here in the 3 land. It's to the point where I've only met one other person who just openly admits that they're a 3, because it's so bad that we're like, the door-to-door salesman telemarketer of the Enneagram.
Well,
so to hear that the other numbers perform as well is helpful.
Yes, and people are often very jealous and intimidated by 3s because y'all are like gorgeous, and not just sort of outwardly, but there's something very appealing and magnetic about the 3. There just is.
I now want to be your best friend, Liz. I'm just going to call you up when I'm having a bad day. And just be like, Janine, you're gorgeous. And the haters are jealous of you.
Exactly. Sorry.
I'm sorry. No, I'm sipping tea as we're talking because I'm also, like we said, so.
We're both coughing. We're both saddled with a cough. So the head center, we're in the head center now, again, types 5, 6, and 7. These are folks that, again, have that incredible mental clarity. A lot of them will describe like knowledge just kind of dropping into their brain, like a puzzle piece, just, and it's like just not knowing where it came from, but it came from somewhere, and it's really precise, and it's really visionary, and it's very future focused. They just have that mental clarity and that really like quiet, precise mind as when they're in a healthy space. And the suffering of the head center types is this fear, and it's fear of the future. It's fear of, am I gonna be okay? And it's really sourced in their pattern of kind of outsourcing their own authority into something else.
Wow.
So the 5s are going to outsource their authority into knowledge, and 6s are going to outsource it into the people that they've deemed as trustworthy, the institutions they've deemed as trustworthy, or their own preparations, although they'll never quite trust all their preparations. And then the 7 is going to outsource it into kind of like future plans and possibilities. I'll be okay if I can bring this scheme into life, but then they just keep thinking of schemes and kind of get high on their own supply of fantasies. So,
wow. Yeah,
so that's your centers. And again, if you're not sure where you land, it's helpful to think, am I often wrestling with anger? Am I often wrestling with shame, or am I often wrestling with fear?
Wow.
And where's my attention? Is it right now? Am I prone to really quick flares of anger or whatever? Is it sort of longing for something that feels like it's missing now? Or am I really worried about the future? And am I going to be all right? So that can help you zero in and at least knock out some possibilities.
And then when we look at the individual numbers, there's sometimes like a quick online test that you can take, and it's like, I'm going to tell you your Enneagram number now. If you just pay $100, you can find out your Enneagram number. What is the danger of using some of those tests rather than doing some reading and education? This is a shameless plug. Work Wisdom also does Enneagram work as well. So to help you walk through it, what would be some of the reasons why you wouldn't just want to take a quick test?
Yeah, I think so. Tests, they're fine for narrowing down options. They're fine for the starting line, but they're not going to take you over the finish line. Again, they are often, they're kind of asking you questions that sometimes can be based in behavior. And it's very different to read a question off a computer screen versus sort of wrestle with a description of what a very core fear might be,
Wow.
which is,
Yeah.
you'd find that in more traditional Enneagram literature, like the Essential Enneagram. So again, I think that tests are perfectly fine to narrow down some options for your further research, but you can't stop at the test, and you can't take it as, clinically diagnostic.
Yeah, I love that. I My next question, and this is, my last question, because I could just talk to you for hours and hours about this.
This is a great conversation. I'm having fun. Thank you for such thoughtful questions.
Yeah, I'm having a great time because I love talking about, self-awareness and how it can be translated in the different, I'm always looking for a life hack, right? Typical three. Just like I'm looking for a way to kind of efficiency, get it done.
Yep.
And what are some of the ways that, the Enneagram has impacted your workplace and your work relationships, and why is it helpful for us as we at Work Wisdom seek to revolutionize achievement, and our listeners who are leaders in their organizations, or maybe they are, not managers yet, but they're leaders in their behaviors. Why is it important to do this work of self-knowledge, and, using the Enneagram could be a helpful tool in that? How has that impacted your workplace, and how can it impact other spaces?
Yeah. Well, it's been an incredible tool in my workplace, in many ways. Most pragmatically, I would say, it gives us a language for talking about the patterns that we fall into. I work, one of my best friends at work, she's my sister. She's 7. And much like me as an 8, she's super high energy. She holds herself to a really high standard, and she's incredibly creative. Is she going to follow through on all of the things that she dreams up? To be determined. She's incredibly high achieving. And knowing that one of her great strengths as a 7 is her ability to draw connections between things that I could never see. Being creative in, problem solving, and really having like this sort of future focus. I can trust her on those things, and I can support her in the execution of these amazing dreams that she comes up with.
I love that.
And for me as an 8, she knows, I've got a ton of stamina to get work done. I am good about boundaries and staying in my lane, but I can be really literal. I'm not going to be imagining or dreaming or like reading the social political scene of work. So she has to like give me some guidance along that. So it gives you the opportunity, it's given us the opportunity to understand ourselves and one another a little bit better. And even kind of get out in front of some of these patterns. And it's been helpful when we've had moments of conflict too. And pushing one another to engage in ways that are more constructive rather than just kind of like writing one another off.
That's amazing.
So again, it's a wonderful language and framework. And none of that matters if it doesn't lead us back to compassion for ourselves first. The Enneagram, it exposes, again, it exposes the shield that we have carried to protect ourselves. But in order to release that shield, we have to have compassion for it and understand why we felt like we had to pick it up in the first place. And so the Enneagram really speaks to the world that we perceive, and what we're trying to protect ourselves from. And again, if you can meet yourself with compassion for the need to have protected yourself at points in your life, then you're not going to have so many feelings about your patterns. You can approach it with a little more curiosity and a little less self-judgment. And I believe that's true of humor too. Like if we can laugh at ourselves, it's not so scary to look at the dumbass things we've done. It's not so scary to look at our BS if we can laugh at it first.
Yes.
So that's what I believe is really the root of, and the most valuable thing about the Enneagram is that it leads us to a place of self-compassion, which then expands outward to compassion for others.
Ugh, Liz, you are a gem. I could honestly talk to you all day. I
Oh,
so appreciate your perspective and I really enjoy the humor. I think that it's a safe way for us
yeah,
to begin to look inward. It's very scary to look down that
it is.
vast
It
corridor that
is.
is your inner workings.
It is.
And
It takes a lot of courage.
it takes a lot of courage. And so I want to thank the listener for opening their hearts and minds to this concept. And Liz, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so grateful to you for being a part of this movement. Where can the listeners find you?
Rude ass Enneagram at Rude ass Enneagram.
At Rudolph's
um,
Enneagram on
yes,
Instagram.
and yes, and I am my term for shameless plug. I'm actually in the process of writing a book. We're still a far way out from publishing, but look out for a snarky, smart ass take on the Enneagram in print, hopefully in 2024.
I will see you on your book tour. I'll be the first in line with my book to get your autograph and my personal message in my book. Thank you so much for joining me today, Liz.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so grateful to you for being a part of this movement of helping others in the workplace to enhance their individual and collective team performance. Thank you, listeners, for downloading The Behaviorist, and we hope you'll subscribe. Please reach out to us through our website, workwisdomllc.com, where you can enjoy Work Wisdom Press and productions. Ask questions and suggestions of topics you'd like us to explore in future episodes. As is our custom, we will leave you with a quote from Flannery O'Connor. To know oneself is, above all, to know what one lacks. It is to measure oneself against truth, and not the other way around. The first product of self-knowledge is humility.